Imagine, after a childhood of loneliness, you finally find family in a band. A band of brothers with vision to change the world. They're scraping by to record their first album. Everyone is broke except for you. You worked a back-breaking job all summer in Alaska, saving every dollar. You don't hesitate. You're going to change the world together. Your heart pounds with anticipation. And then, your brothers tell you it would be better if you didn't play on the album. They throw you a bone, putting your picture on the album cover. A few months later, they politely ask you to leave. They nonchalantly let you go. You're a band of brothers indeed. Imagine. Well, that's precisely what happened to Jason Everman. Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Jonah, and if you'd like to talk about music, musicians, their stories, their myths, you've come to the right place. Today, I want to talk about Jason Everman. I was familiar with Jason Everman. He is a little bit more visible than Yamamoto. And that's mostly because of an episode he did on the Joe Rogan Experience. And I listened to the whole thing. I'm filling in some of the gaps by reading this book over here. I picked it up from the library on one of your recommendations as well. Everybody Loves Our Town. I'm still pretty early on in the read. It's starting to help me paint a picture of Seattle during that time period. Early 60s, mid 60s to like early 70s is probably when what we call the grunge generation is coming to be. And I've never been to Seattle. And I'm starting to get a picture a little bit through the testimonials in this book about what it was like and what that movement and that scene was growing out of. It feels like it was just a really secluded place. It was far away from everything. So culturally, it was a desert. It was really a cultural desert. I mean, there was a fishing culture, there was a farming culture, it was largely white, very rural and suburban, and this Generation X is quite disaffected, and their outlets in that area are limited. They're limited to sports culture, all-American football, what have you, and if that doesn't float your boat, and you're not super academic, if you're a little bit more artsy and a little bit more out there is a punk rock scene over there, which a lot of these people emerge from, and a skateboarding scene. And that's about it, man. So, drugs. Lots and lots of drugs. Even from the parents' generation, the boomers, there's just drugs all over the place. There's a lot of despair, a lot of gloominess. And from that comes, I guess, a lot of drug abuse. That's a bit of a background to where Jason Everman is born. And he doesn't share too much biographical information. He talks about his childhood being quite unhappy. I mean, he just doesn't find himself, doesn't find himself in school, I don't think, or in academics early on, although he could excel. Because what we'll find out soon as we start to dive into his story is that Jason Everman is the kind of person that can achieve almost anything if he puts his mind to it. He's a little bit athletic, he's got athleticism, unlike some of these musicians that we're talking about, and unlike me, for sure. So skateboarding is appealing to him. It's got both, breaking the laws and all that, but it also has an athletic component, and that's the first outlet. And then I guess he starts hanging out with some skaters, and he gets exposed to punk rock. He mentions Black Flag as kind of a epiphany moment for him, because around him in Seattle, like, bands are starting to form all over the place. And he wasn't ever someone who was all that interested in music, but punk rock really hits a nerve with him for two reasons. First of all, technically, it's just not that complicated. So he says, like, if you listen to Led Zeppelin and you enjoy it, you never just imagine, hey, I could do that one day. But if you listen to punk rock and it's more about the attitude and three chords, then it's like, oh, I could probably do that if I wanted to. So that's one thing, that's a light bulb in his head. And the other thing is the attitude, this in-your-face anti-authority, and this brotherhood, which I think is the tying theme in his life. Those punk rock bands, they're groups of outcasts out there breaking the law. They have their own ideas, they do not conform, but they are together in it. They're brothers in arms. He gets a guitar somehow, and he starts by, listening to records and playing along. And he's the kind of guy that when he puts his mind to something, he just can do it. So he gets good enough, fast enough that he can do it without any formal training. And I think he starts playing in local bands or jamming around with people. And more importantly, getting to be part of that forming scene of musicians that is later going to be called grunge, but no one was calling it that at the time. But it was music born out of punk rock, but also born out of 80s glam, like Kiss and stuff like that, with a special hippie kind of Seattle twist to it. And I think socially that's appealing to Everman. He says he was very introverted before that, but starting to play in music helps him with girls. And that's nice. And then famously, he joins Nirvana. Nirvana is still quite early in their career, but not so early that they're complete unknowns. They're like budding junior members of the scene. They hang around the Melvins a lot. They're kind of known as almost like the Melvins' little brothers. So Nirvana's about to go on tour. Kurt decides that he wants a second guitarist, a lot like he did when Pat Smear joined later on. And I guess they fall on Jason Everman, who is very enthusiastic. I wish Rogan asked him more about his impressions about Kurt Cobain in those early days when he joined. But of course, he has to be very diplomatic. Kurt Cobain is a saint. His legacy is untouchable. But the little bit of complaints that he is willing to say is that Kurt is a perfectionist. That's very well known. And he's kind of a really controlling person. Nirvana is an extension of his vision. It's not a band, it's not really open to other collaborations. At the time, their drummer is Chad Channing, and that is a source of frustration. I believe for Jason Everman, it's because his ideology about bands were that it would be more democratic. It would be that kind of band of brothers, and that everyone's input would be welcome towards an understood greater goal, even if Kurt was the leader. And he didn't get that over there. It was an opportunity to go ahead and tour. And so he was a yes man to Kurt Cobain, did what he was told to, and they toured together for a few months. And then Everman puts up the $600 towards a recording of Bleach. That is baffling to me. That is a well-known thing. There's a picture of him on the album cover, and Kurt says it's kind of a thank you to him. But I mean, he financed the album himself. $600 is still not chump change back in the day for a 20-year-old kid to put that and then not to be allowed to play on the album. I mean, that's gotta sting. That's gotta hurt. I really want to know what happened behind the scenes there. Did he ask to be part of the recordings and Kurt turned him down? He always said there's no strings attached. He's happy to do it. It's an investment on his part. It's incredibly altruistic. He fronts the money. Bleach ends up being a huge success in propelling Nirvana forward, but shortly thereafter, Everman is fired from Nirvana. See, you had to have a drummer. There's no way around it. But I think Kurt wanted to keep it small just so he could really concentrate his creative control and not have to worry about other people. And Jason is let go. Now, Jason tells Joe Rogan that his attachment to Nirvana, despite the fact that he's invested in them, was not as big as what was about to come next. Everman is not attached to a career in music necessarily. It was working out for him for a while, but he's considering ditching it after the Nirvana thing. He's got a bunch of ideas, as we'll see throughout his life. Music is only one of them, but he's part of the scene now, and the scene has kind of an inertia. And a little while after he gets fired from Nirvana, he gets a phone call from Kim Thayil. Would he like to go and audition to play bass for Soundgarden? Because Soundgarden needed a new bass player because Hiro Yamamoto had just quit. Like we discussed in this episode before. And so there was a vacuum there, and they were about to really enter the big time. They needed a bass player ASAP. Kim, I don't know if he knew Jason personally, probably knew him personally, thought he would be a good fit, and calls him over to come try out for Soundgarden. And Jason says that at the time Soundgarden is his favorite band. Like, they are the biggest thing on the scene. Everyone knew about Soundgarden. They were the role model and the proof that good things could come out from playing music in Seattle or that area. So, I mean, of course Jason says yes, even if he's apprehensive about his playing music. He says he figures there's no way in hell he's gonna get it. But he gets it, which speaks, I think, volumes, A, about his musicianship, and B, about how much he knew and loved Soundgarden. So he probably was familiar with their music, so when he comes in and asks to play it, it's pretty easy for him to learn it. And bam, you're in. And that is euphoria for him. That is achieving the dream. That is rock stardom incarnate for Jason Everman. He is now part of Soundgarden. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, as he would later admit, the Soundgarden thing is not meant to last either. He doesn't stay there very long. I don't know exactly how long, a few months, it seems to me. He's not on a major album. He might be part of a tour. He definitely plays shows. I know there's recordings of them with him on it, but he's not there for very long. He gets fired. When Rogan asks Everman why he was let go of Soundgarden, Jason says he doesn't really know, but he alludes to the fact that he wasn't getting along with Chris Cornell that well. So, I mean, of course, that would do it. By that point in Soundgarden, I think it was becoming very, very clear and consolidated around Chris Cornell. And so, if Chris wasn't having it, well then, the band wasn't going to have it. There is no band without Chris Cornell. There's a great quote of Jason Everman from the Joe Rogan interview. I'm going to be paraphrasing it a little bit, but he calls Chris Cornell this genetically engineered rock god. That's such a great, funny quote, but it's so true. I mean, Cornell's voice is so good. Cornell understands music, controls music, and channels music in a way that just, he's like a rock god, seriously. And I wish I knew more about Chris Cornell because he's a very opaque figure. I do not understand Chris Cornell at all. He is very enigmatic. He's a very closed book to me, and I don't know what goes on in his mind. It's hard for me to crack. Chris Cornell is a bona fide rock god. And when he tells Jason to take a hike, that hurts. That hurts. That is being told, for one reason or another, you're not good enough for this, by someone you idolize. And that sends him on a spiral. Being fired from Soundgarden is arguably the most important part of his biography that's going to shape up the rest of his life. I'm not going to dwell too long on the rest of his biography because there's so much more to it. Everman, he moves to New York. He swears off music for a long time because he's so hurt by what happened with Soundgarden. Then he gets roped back into it. It's a very long story. I don't want this to become a 3-hour episode as well. But at a certain point, after more ups and downs and failures, Everman joins the military. He joins the Special Forces, and he excels there. The army is where he finds that brotherhood, I think, that he was always looking for, and he couldn't find in the music scene. He always wanted to be part of something, of a group, so the army is just perfect for that. You have objectives, you have missions. It's very clear what's wanted from you. The metrics of success and failure are really, really clear, and that's super appealing to him. And he does really well in that environment. And as someone who's served in the army as well, I totally get it. I mean, I hated the army. I did not excel there because I'm just not physically capable of being a good soldier. But Jason Everman is, and he's got the right mindset. The appeal of it, the clarity of the lifestyle over there. He doesn't let the downs in his life take him down. He's a very much pull yourself by your bootstraps kind of guy. So the downs of the army, when they break you down in basic training and stuff like that, that doesn't destroy his spirit. That motivates him to keep going, and he excels. And he's in Special Forces, and he does really good in his military career, and he finds meaning after 9/11. But the story continues because he's a lifelong seeker. He's the epitome of life is a journey, not a destination. He gets out of the army. He goes and studies philosophy as an undergraduate in his 30s at Columbia University as part of the GI Bill. say what you want about the man, he's not motivated by money making. He's just leaving money all over the place, studying philosophy. He could have excelled, I'm pretty sure, at almost any subject that he picked in college. You know, if he went to study economics or business or something, he would have done just fine. But he's a seeker. He studies philosophy. He knows a ton about history. When he talks to Joe Rogan, it's just clear he's so well read. He knows so much about so many things, but he never lands anywhere. At a certain point in the Joe Rogan interview, Jason Everman comes up with a name for the daughter he's going to have. One of his low points, waiting to record an album. I forget the name, I forget the band, I forget the album. But I remember that fact because I was wondering whether or not he ever got married, if he had children, and he didn't. And that makes me sad because I really think this would be the perfect next chapter. It's the only open end because for a man who's very Buddhist, for a man who's not looking for closures, and yet there's a need for continuity, I feel. And he has learned so much. And he has developed such a strong ethic, such a strong philosophy about life, about phases of life, and how when it's time to move on, you have to move on. And as someone who never thought I'd be a father myself, and I am a father now, and I'm experiencing the joys of that, I really think he would dig it. I really think he would enjoy it. I think he would excel at it. And I think it would be a fantastic outlet to pass on some of these things that he has learned through his hard-lived life. Of course, one of my Dr. Phil, but you know, Jason Everman is not the kind of person to listen to anyone's advice. Joe Rogan gave him a few, including the thing about kids, including writing a book, which I also think is a good idea and another good way to pass on the wisdom. But he's a personality type. I have a good friend that is like him. You don't tell a person like Jason Everman what to do. He's lived and he's fought long enough and hard enough to not take anyone else's word for anything, to not compromise any of his values. He stands on very firm grounds in terms of knowing who he is and what he believes in, while respecting everyone else. You know, not feeling like he's above anyone else, but just being very comfortable with who he is and what he believes in. So, I'm not the one who's going to tell him what to do. It's not too late. Maybe he will come to that conclusion himself one day. In any case, we are blessed to live in the same world as him. I hope to hear more from him. I wonder if he ever did any songwriting on his own at any point, because I didn't find any. And if there is any songwriting that he did, even just shitty sketches, I would be very interested to hear them. Be very interested to hear what that was about. At the end of the Joe Rogan podcast, Jason's new thing was sailing. He was gonna do like a big sail thing, and he bought a sailboat, and he was talking about the crew that he assembled together. And that part of it I loved, because when he talked about his crew, and he's like, oh, my crew is assembled out of these former people from his music days, a producer, a musician, and then some people from his army days, these veterans, these filmmakers, these people that have seen the world in so many different ways. And it occurred to me that this crew, these friendships that he's cultivated, well, that is the band of brothers that he was always in search of. He has that now. If you've stuck this long, and this is a long episode, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate your time. Time is such a precious commodity these days, and you choosing to give it to my channel means the world. Please subscribe. to help me grow and continue doing that. And I will see you next time. Say hi to Bianca.